Love is not just for this world. If you want to discover feelings that transcend boundaries, subscribe now. The sky split apart. A streak of fire tore through the upper atmosphere, a brilliant arc of destruction slashing across the darkness. It moved too fast, too deliberate, not the random descent of a meteor, not the careless remnants of space debris. This was something else, something controlled, until it wasn't. The explosion came seconds later. A deafening roar rolled across the empty desert, shaking the earth beneath my boots. A shockwave rippled through the sand, kicking up a storm of dust that billowed outward in great swirling clouds, turning the night into a thick haze of gold and smoke. I shielded my eyes, heart hammering in my chest. Whatever had fallen, it was close, and it did not belong to this world. For a long moment, I didn't move. Common sense told me to turn around. Go back. Whatever had crashed wasn't my problem. But logic had never been my strongest trait, and curiosity pulled at me like a rope around my ribs. I climbed in my truck, the old engine rumbling to life as I pressed the gas, gravel crunching beneath my tires. The drive was short, a few miles at most. The night was still thick with dust, but I didn't need to see clearly to find it. I could smell it. The sharp bite of burning metal, the acrid tang of scorched earth. As I crested a small hill, the wreckage came into view. The ship, if it could still be called that, was nothing more than a skeleton of twisted alloy, its sleek frame shattered across the desert floor. Parts of it still burned, molten edges glowing orange in the darkness. Jagged pieces of wreckage lay strewn in every direction, some embedded deep into the ground from the force of impact. Smoke coiled lazily into the sky, twisting like a living thing. The crater itself was massive, the earth carved out in a violent, uneven scar. And then I saw her. At first, she was nothing more than a pale figure half buried beneath the debris, motionless. But as I stepped closer, picking my way through the smoldering wreckage, I realized she was alive. Barely. She lay beneath a collapsed section of the hull, her body twisted awkwardly, one arm pinned beneath her. Blood, dark and iridescent, pooled at her side, shimmering beneath the firelight like liquid mercury. Her skin, though human in structure, carried a faint silver sheen, as if woven with strands of metal. Her hair was white, not from age, but by nature, tangled and matted with soot. She looked otherworldly, something out of a dream, or perhaps a nightmare. I crouched beside her, hesitant. Her breathing was shallow, uneven. When I moved closer, her eyelids fluttered open, and for the first time, I saw her eyes. They were not human. The pupils were vertical slits, sharp and precise, like a predator's. But they were soft, too, brilliant pools of violet light that flickered weakly as they tried to focus on me. She didn't speak at first, just stared, her lips parted as if the effort of breathing took everything she had left. Then, barely more than a whisper, "Help me." I didn't answer. I didn't know how to. 1,000 thoughts ran through my head, each one louder than the last. Who was she? What was she? Why had she crashed here? And, perhaps the most dangerous question of all, was she alone? Logic told me to walk away. She wasn't my responsibility. If she was part of something bigger, something dangerous, then I had no business getting involved. But then her body trembled, a shuddering gasp racking through her, and I realized she was dying, right there in front of me, and I couldn't let that happen. I pressed my hands against the twisted metal pinning her arm. It was heavy, warped from the heat, but I pushed, teeth clenched as I forced it upward just enough for her to free herself. She let out a sharp, strangled breath, curling in on herself in pain. "Can you move?" I asked. Her eyes flickered toward mine, her expression tight with frustration. Not alone. That was all the permission I needed. I slid an arm beneath her shoulders and lifted. She was lighter than I expected, but her body was tense, muscles coiled as if expecting agony with every shift. She barely made a sound, though, only the occasional sharp inhale as I carried her away from the wreckage. Even half-conscious, her grip on my arm was fierce, as though holding onto me was the only thing tethering her to life. I glanced back at the ruins of her ship. The damage was too severe, too deliberate. This hadn't been an accident. Someone had destroyed it. Someone had tried to kill her. And now, because I had chosen to help, I had made myself a part of it. My truck was parked just beyond the crater's edge. I eased her into the passenger seat, careful not to jostle her wounds. Her breathing was shallow, but she was still fighting to stay conscious, her fingers curled into fists against her lap. I climbed in beside her, started the engine. The truck rumbled to life, a stark contrast to the eerie silence that had settled over the crash site. As I gripped the steering wheel, my eyes flickered toward the sky. If whoever had done this was watching, if they were coming to finish the job, then I had just put myself in their path. But there was no turning back now. She had fallen from the stars. And for better or worse, I had caught her. Now I just had to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do next. The road unraveled before me, a ribbon of black cutting through the barren desert. The truck's headlights carved narrow tunnels of pale light into the void, illuminating the dust swirling in the night air. Beside me, the woman, if that word could even begin to describe her, sat motionless, her breathing shallow and uneven. Though I drove as smoothly as the rough terrain allowed, every bump sent a barely perceptible tremor through her frame. Her posture remained rigid, as though sheer willpower alone kept her from collapsing. I stole a glance at her, the dim dashboard glow washing over her strange, luminous skin. Even now, injured and weak, she carried herself with a kind of quiet defiance, a refusal to yield to pain or circumstance. The wound at her side still bled, though sluggishly now, the iridescent liquid soaking into the tattered remains of her suit. It clung to her like a second skin, once elegant, now ruined, burned at the edges, torn where shrapnel had torn through flesh. She should have been unconscious by now. A wound like that, the blood loss alone, any human would have slipped into shock. But she wasn't human. The silver sheen of her skin, the uncanny glow of her eyes, the way she carried herself, it was undeniable. She was something else entirely. The silence between us stretched long, unbroken except for the low hum of the engine and the distant wail of the wind sweeping across the empty land. Then at last she stirred. "Where are you taking me?" Her voice was barely stronger than a whisper, rough with exhaustion, but steady. It was the first time she had spoken since I'd pulled her from the wreckage. Her accent, if it could be called that, was unfamiliar, her words precise, carefully measured, as if speaking my language took effort. "My place," I answered. "Nothing special, but it beats bleeding out in the desert." She exhaled softly, a sound that might have been relief or quiet acceptance. Then, after a moment, she said, "You should not have helped me." A strange thing to say, given the circumstances. "You'd rather I left you there?" Her gaze shifted toward me, and even in the dim light, those violet eyes cut through the darkness, sharp and searching. "It would have been safer." "Maybe," I admitted, "but I don't make a habit of letting people die on my doorstep." For a long moment, she was silent, watching me with an unreadable expression. Then, so quietly I almost missed it, she said, "Then you are a fool." The words held no malice, no heat, just a simple, resigned truth. The road stretched on, winding through an expanse of nothingness. I lived far from town, not out of necessity, but by choice. Years spent in places I didn't belong had left me with a taste for solitude, a preference for silence over the weight of human expectation. People asked too many questions, wanted too many things. Here, in the quiet vastness of the desert, I could be invisible. Or at least, I had been. Until tonight. The house came into view, nestled against the base of a rocky outcrop, modest in size but sturdy, built to withstand the relentless elements. No neighbors for miles, just the whisper of wind through the scrubland. I cut the engine, and for a moment, the absence of sound felt almost deafening. She moved first, trying to shift on her own, but the instant she did, pain flared across her features. Her hands clenched into fists, her jaw tightening. She was trying desperately to maintain control, to keep from showing weakness, but her body betrayed her. "Easy," I said, moving around to her side. She hesitated as I reached for her, tension coiling in her muscles, as if she still wasn't sure whether I was a greater threat than the injury that crippled her. But in the end, necessity won over pride, and she let me lift her. She was lighter than I expected, lean but solid, her body built not for brute strength but for speed, agility. Even now, weakened as she was, there was an underlying power in her, a strength that had nothing to do with sheer force. As I carried her inside, she barely made a sound, though her fingers curled involuntarily against my arm, a fleeting instinct to brace herself against the pain. I set her down on the couch, careful not to jostle her wound more than necessary. She tensed, drawing a sharp breath, but said nothing. I worked quickly, retrieving the emergency kit from the cabinet. The wound was deep, the edges ragged as though whatever had struck her had burned as it cut. My hands moved automatically, pressing a clean cloth against the bleeding, watching the way her skin reacted. Too smooth, too metallic in the firelight. Human biology rules didn't apply here, which meant I had no way of knowing whether this was helping or making it worse. She didn't flinch, didn't pull away, but the effort to remain still was evident. Her breathing was too controlled, too measured. What did this? I asked. Her eyes flickered open, hazy with exhaustion, but still piercing. There was a pause before she answered. Weapon. Yours. Something shifted in her expression, something bitter. No. I pressed down harder to stop the bleeding, earning a sharp inhale, the first real sign of pain she'd allowed herself to show. Who attacked you? Another pause. Not hesitation out of fear, but calculation, measuring how much to reveal. Then, finally, with quiet certainty, she said, My own. The words hung between us, heavy with implication. I let them settle, considering the weight they carried. If she was running from her own people, it meant one of two things. Either she had done something to deserve their wrath, or they weren't as noble as she had once believed. Neither option boded well for me. I stitched the wound with as much precision as I could, but even as I worked, I noticed something strange. The edges of the wound were already trying to close. Not enough to fully heal. Not yet, but enough to be noticeable. Her body was fighting to mend itself, far faster than any humans would. Her breathing slowed as the tension in her muscles eased slightly. Exhaustion dragged at her, but she forced her eyes to stay open, watching me with that same wary intensity. You should not involve yourself in this, she said again. I let out a dry chuckle. Pretty sure it's too late for that. Her expression remained unchanged. They will come for me. The way she said it left no room for doubt. It wasn't a possibility. It was a certainty. I leaned back, tossing the bloodied cloth aside. Then I guess I'd better be ready. She studied me, something unreadable passing through her gaze. Then, finally, as if conceding some unspoken argument, she closed her eyes. Her body gave in at last, surrendering to the exhaustion she had been holding at bay. Sleep claimed her fast, her breath evening out, her muscles finally relaxing. For a long moment, I just sat there, watching her. The weight of the situation pressed in from all sides, the enormity of it settling deep in my bones. I didn't know what I had just gotten myself into. But when the wind shifted outside, carrying the faint scent of scorched ozone, something that didn't belong in the desert, I knew one thing. We weren't alone. The wind had died completely. No whisper through the scrubland, no shifting of the dunes. Even the distant, restless howl that usually carried through the night had gone silent. It wasn't the natural hush of an empty desert. This was something else. A pause. A breath held in the lungs of the world. Waiting. I had felt it before. That heavy stillness before a predator strikes. Before a storm breaks. Before something irreversible happens. Serena had felt it too. She was on her feet now, one hand braced against the couch for balance, the other resting lightly against her side. Her wound was closing, but I could see the strain in her shoulders, the sharp set of her jaw. Healing wasn't effortless. It took something from her, and right now, she didn't have much left to give. She had said one would come. Not an army, not a fleet, just one, and that was enough. I reached for the shotgun by the door, the wood smooth and familiar beneath my fingers. A useless instinct, probably, but an instinct all the same. Serena's gaze flicked to the weapon. If she had an opinion on it, she kept it to herself. "What is it?" I asked. She didn't answer right away. She turned her head slightly, as if listening to something beyond my range of hearing. Her eyes darkened, the glow within them dimming like embers cooling in ash. "Not a thing," she murmured. "A force." That was not the answer I wanted. A shape shifted in the darkness beyond the porch. Not the wind, not an animal. Something slow, deliberate. I exhaled, steadying my grip. "I assume it bleeds." Serena's lips barely moved, but I caught the whisper of a response. "If you're lucky." I wasn't sure if she meant me or it. The shape stepped forward into the weak firelight spilling through the doorway. For a moment, it was nothing more than a silhouette, a suggestion of movement against the night. But then the light caught it, just barely, and I wished it hadn't. It was tall, too tall, its proportions just wrong enough to unsettle something deep in my gut. At first glance, it looked humanoid. A broad-shouldered frame, long limbs, a head tilted just slightly to one side, as if studying me in return. But the details were off. The edges of its body flickered. The way heat rises off pavement, a distortion against reality itself. Its skin, if it even had skin, shifted, dark one second, metallic the next, as though it couldn't decide what it was supposed to be. It had no eyes, no mouth, no features at all. Just a smooth, undefined face that somehow still gave the distinct impression of watching. And then it moved. Not forward, not backward, but through. 1 second, it was standing at the edge of the porch. The next, it was closer, without a step, without a sound. Like distance meant nothing to it. Like space itself bent around its presence. I pulled the trigger. The blast shattered the silence, kicking back against my shoulder, the sound rolling through the desert in a crack of thunder. The thing barely flinched. Pellets of buckshot hit the shifting form, but instead of tearing through, they slowed, hung there, then fell useless to the ground. As if whatever it was had decided, mid-impact, that bullets simply did not apply to it. My stomach turned to ice. Serena hadn't moved, but her entire body was coiled with something that wasn't fear. It was focus, calculation. "That won't work," she said. Not a warning, a statement of fact. I tightened my grip on the shotgun. Noticed that. The hunter cocked its head slightly, the motion eerily deliberate, considering. Then it stepped forward, and this time it walked. The weight of it hit like a pressure wave. Not sound, not force, just presence, like a current of air that somehow pressed against the bones beneath my skin. It wasn't moving quickly. It didn't have to. My pulse pounded in my throat. "How do we kill it?" Serena's fingers twitched at her side. "You don't." Not an encouraging answer. The thing took another step, and the house creaked as if the weight of it was pressing down on more than just the ground. My mind was scrambling, trying to piece together anything that made sense. Weapons wouldn't work. Running wouldn't work. Then what? Serena inhaled sharply, and I turned just in time to see her move. Fast. Faster than she should have been able to. 1 second, she was beside me. The next, she was on the thing, driving her hands, bare, weaponless, straight into the distortion of its form. The impact sent out a ripple, like throwing a stone into still water. The thing shuddered. The flickering at its edges grew erratic, its shape warping. For the first time, it reacted. Not in pain, not in surprise, but in acknowledgement. Serena was breathing hard, her arms trembling where they pressed against its shifting body. Move. I didn't hesitate. Whatever she was doing, it wasn't something I could help with. I stepped back, eyes darting to the door, calculating distance, exit routes. The hunter pulsed. That was the only way to describe it. Its form rippled outward, and suddenly Serena was the one thrown backward, her body hitting the ground hard. She gasped, her fingers digging into the dirt, but her expression remained unreadable. The thing didn't follow her. It didn't need to. It turned its head toward me. I felt it then, a presence behind my eyes, a weight pressing against my thoughts. It wasn't speaking, not with words, not even with intent. It was just there, inside my head, taking up space where it didn't belong. Serena's voice cut through the haze. Do not engage. Do not let it in. I clenched my teeth, forced my mind to focus, to push back. And just like that, the pressure was gone. I staggered, my breath coming hard. The hunter hadn't moved, but I had the distinct impression it had learned something. And that was worse than if it had attacked. Serena was on her feet again, her stance shifting, adjusting. It won't kill you yet, she murmured. Not until it understands you. Wonderful. So we had that going for us. The hunter tilted its head again, and for the first time, it stepped back. Not far, just enough to signal something that made my blood turn cold. It wasn't retreating. It was waiting. I swallowed hard, the night pressing in around us once more. We need a new plan. Serena exhaled slowly. Then, voice steady, she said, we don't kill it. I frowned. Then what? She met my gaze, eyes dark with something unreadable. We outthink it. The hunter did not leave. It stood at the edge of the firelight, still as stone, watching. If it had eyes, they were hidden beneath the shifting blur of its form. It did not breathe. It did not waver. It only existed, waiting. The air around it pulsed in slow, deliberate waves, distorting the space between us. It wasn't heat, not exactly. More like the world itself was rejecting its presence, struggling to define something that refused to be understood. Serena remained beside me, her breath steady but deliberate. She wasn't afraid. Not in the way I was. Not in the way a person fears something they don't understand. Her fear was something else entirely, sharpened, honed, a blade she had long since learned to carry. It's testing us, she said quietly. I kept my voice low. For what? To see if we are worth its effort. The weight of those words pressed in my ribs. And if we are, her fingers twitched at her side. Then it will act. The hunter took a single step forward. The fire behind us flared, the flames stretching unnaturally high, casting long, spined shadows across the ground. The moment passed, and the fire dimmed once more, but the message had been clear. It was done waiting. Serena moved first. Not to attack, not to run, but to shift her weight, just enough to place herself between me and the thing in the dark. The gesture was instinctive, unconscious. It told me everything I needed to know. She didn't think I could stop it. She wasn't sure she could, either. I exhaled slowly, my grip tightening on the shotgun, even though I knew it was worthless. You said we outthink it. Yes. Now would be a good time to elaborate. Serena's eyes flicked to mine, assessing. It isn't indestructible, she said, but it is inevitable. Not comforting. It isn't meant to be. The hunter moved again. Another step. Slow. Measured. The pressure in the air thickened, like the build of a storm about to break. Serena reached into the ruined fabric of her suit, her fingers closing around something small, metallic. She pulled it free, what was left of the device she had disabled earlier. A communicator. A beacon. A tool that had already betrayed her once. She turned it over in her hand, pressing a thumb against its fractured surface. A sharp, broken sound crackled through the space between us, distorted, dissonant. A voice, or the echo of one, tried to form words in a language not meant for human ears. Serena's shoulders stiffened. The hunter paused. I didn't breathe. Then, all at once, the sound cut out. The hunter's form flickered violently, its edges unraveling and snapping back into place. The ground beneath it blackened, not with fire, but with absence. The space where it stood became less than empty, a hollow cut into the fabric of the world itself. Serena moved, not toward it, away. Run. I didn't ask why. I turned, sprinting toward the truck, gravel skidding beneath my boots. Serena was a step behind me, close but not close enough to slow me down. The hunter did not pursue. Not yet, because it didn't need to. The world bent behind us. The truck came into view, a dark silhouette against the starlit sky. My keys were already in my pocket, my fingers curling around them as I hit the driver's side door. The moment my hand touched the handle, the hunter moved. I didn't see it. I didn't hear it. I felt it. A pressure against my skull, against my thoughts, a presence that was not my own pressing inward. Not words, Not commands. Just wait. A reminder. It could reach me anytime it wanted. My stomach lurched, ball rising in my throat. I shoved the door open, sliding into the seat just as Serenia climbed in beside me. The truck roared to life, the engine shaking the frame beneath us. I hit the gas. The wheels spun against the dirt for a half-second too long before catching, the force slamming us forward onto the open road. I glanced at the rearview mirror. The hunter stood exactly where we had left it, watching. I should have felt relief. I didn't. Serenia exhaled sharply, pressing a palm against her forehead. It won't follow. Not yet. I gritted my teeth. Then why the hell are we running? She turned her head slightly, just enough for me to see the look in her eyes. Because it let us. That sent something cold down my spine. I forced my focus back onto the road, my hands tied on the wheel. We needed distance. We needed time. But more than anything, we needed a way to stop something that, by Serenia's own admission, did not stop. I swallowed hard, forcing my breath to even out. You've seen one before, haven't you? A beat of silence. Not like this, she admitted. Not here. Then where? Another silence. This one longer. Then, quietly, a place that no longer exists. Her words sat heavy between us. She hadn't been running from an enemy. She had been running from an extinction. I pressed harder on the gas. The road stretched ahead, dark and empty, but I no longer had the illusion that it led to safety. Whatever Serenia had been running from, whatever had been sent to erase her, had already reached this world. And now, because I had chosen to help her, it had marked me too. The thought should have terrified me. It did in a way, but fear wasn't useful. Not now. I inhaled, steadying my pulse. Tell me how to fight it. Serenia watched the road ahead, her expression unreadable. Then, finally, she answered. You don't. I clenched my jaw. Then tell me how to win. Her fingers curled against her knee, the tension in them subtle but telling. We get what it wants. That was the last thing I expected her to say. I shot her a sharp look. You're saying we surrender? I'm saying we set the terms. A slow dread unfurled my chest. She wasn't talking about a battle. She was talking about negotiation. And for the first time, I wondered if this thing, the thing that had torn apart entire worlds, that had hunted her across the stars, wanted something more than just her death. I wasn't sure if that made things better or worse. The road stretched ahead, an endless ribbon of asphalt swallowed by the night. The truck rattled over uneven terrain, the hum of the engine the only sound cutting through the silence. The world outside was an empty abyss, but it felt anything but still. It felt watched. Serenia sat beside me, her posture rigid, fingers curled against her knee. She hadn't spoken since she'd uttered those last, unsettling words. We set the terms. I wanted to push her, demand answers, but I knew better. She wasn't holding back to frustrate me. She was calculating. So I waited. After a long moment, she exhaled. It won't follow right away. That didn't make me feel better. Why? It has learned enough. It will want more. More. I tightened my grip on the wheel. I didn't ask what more meant because I already knew. The thing wasn't just hunting her. It was studying her. And now me. The thought settled uneasily in my chest. I forced my focus back on the road, keeping my speed steady. There was nowhere to run. Not really. The hunter didn't chase in the way a man or an animal would. It didn't need to. It moved in ways that bent the rules of reality, as if space itself were only a suggestion. Serenia turned her head slightly, watching me. You don't trust me. It wasn't a question. I let the silence stretch before answering. I don't trust things I don't understand. She tilted her head, considering. Then you trust nothing. That made me huff out something that wasn't quite a laugh. Maybe. Her gaze flicked to the horizon. That will not serve you here. Where is here exactly? I asked, because I was under the impression this was my world. But it doesn't feel like mine anymore. She hesitated. It never was. I didn't like the sound of that. The truck's headlights caught the skeletal remains of a long-abandoned gas station up ahead. A warped sign barely clinging to rusted poles, the windows shattered, time having long since claimed it. It was as good a place as any to stop, and we needed to. I pulled in, the tires crunching over gravel. The moment the engine died, the silence deepened. A quiet that wasn't quite natural. I opened the door, stepping into the cool desert air. The wind had picked up again, but it carried something with it now, a scent I couldn't quite place. Not smoke, not ozone, something thinner, like air that had been stretched too far. Serenia climbed out beside me, her movements slow, deliberate. She didn't look at the gas station. She looked at the sky. I followed her gaze. Nothing but stars. But she wasn't looking at them. She was looking through them. A chill worked its way down my spine. It's still watching, isn't it? She nodded. It does not need eyes. I swallowed hard. Tell me what it wants. For the first time, she looked uncertain. I don't know. That was the last answer I wanted. I ran a hand through my hair, trying to push back the frustration gnawing at me. So we're just supposed to wait for it to make its next move? No, she said. We make ours first. I frowned. You just said we couldn't fight it. We can't. I exhaled sharply. Then what exactly do you suggest? She hesitated. Not because she doubted herself, but because she wasn't sure I was ready for what she was about to say. Finally, she spoke. We let it inside. A thick, weighted silence fell between us. I stared at her. Come again. Serenia's expression remained unreadable. It is already trying to break into your mind. That's what it does. It does not kill without understanding first. It consumes information, dissects it, bends it to its purpose. That is why it waits. I shook my head, incredulous. And you want to let it do that? I want to control what it finds. I ran a hand down my face. You better start making sense real fast. She took a step closer, her voice lower now, deliberate. It is not alive in the way you think. It does not breathe, does not hunger, does not desire the way organic minds do. It processes. It adapts. Right now, it sees you as an anomaly, something outside its understanding. That is why it waits, because it does not act without certainty. I exhaled slowly, trying to grasp what she was saying. So you want to what? Feed it the wrong information? Serenia held my gaze. Misdirection is a weapon, just like any other. The idea sent something cold curling through my gut. And if it realizes we're lying? Her expression darkened. Then it will erase us. Fan-fucking-tastic. I glanced back at the truck. Running wasn't an option. Neither was fighting. That left us with this. A trap, but one we had to set inside our own heads. I took a slow breath, forcing my pulse to steady. Tell me how. Serenia hesitated, then lifted a hand. Look at me. I did. Her violet eyes caught the faint glow of the stars, deep and endless. Let it in, she said, but do not let it see. Before I could ask what the hell that meant, the world around me shifted. Not physically, not in any way I could name, but I felt it like stepping off solid ground and realizing too late there was nothing beneath me. A presence uncoiled at the edges of my thoughts. No sound, no voice, just weight. I gritted my teeth, resisting the urge to push back. Serenia's voice was distant now, inside my mind instead of outside it. Do not think of what is real. Think of what is not. That made no sense, but I had no time to question it. The pressure increased, pressing against the cracks in my consciousness, searching. I forced my thoughts to scatter, to fray at the edges. I let my mind slip into useless memories, things that had no pattern, no weight. A childhood fight, the smell of motor oil, a song half remembered from a broken radio. The pressure hesitated. Then like a tide pulling back, it receded. I gasped, stumbling forward, the world snapping back into focus. My heart hammered against my ribs, sweat slick on the back of my neck. Serenia studied me, unreadable. It will return. I forced out a breath. And next time, she exhaled slowly. Next time, we don't let it leave. I stared at her. We weren't just fighting it. We were trapping it. The night held its breath. Somewhere in the darkness, the hunter waited, watching, calculating. The presence of it lingered just beyond my awareness, a pressure against my thoughts, a shadow without form. It had learned enough to pause, to consider. That was our only advantage. Serenia stood across from me, the neon glow of the broken gas station sign casting faint blue light against her silvered skin. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes were sharp, focused. Whatever plan she had formed, it was already in motion. You understand what we have to do, she said. It wasn't a question. I exhaled slowly. You want to trap it inside our minds. Make it think it's one before it realizes we're the ones in control. She nodded once. It does not think like you or me. It does not question its own conclusions. If we convince it that the information it gathers is truth, it will not challenge that truth. I ran a hand through my hair, trying to shake the weight pressing against my thoughts. And what exactly do we make it believe? Serena tilted her head slightly, considering that I am already dead. I stared at her. She met my gaze without hesitation. It was sent to erase me. If it believes it has succeeded, it will leave. That's a big if, I muttered. It does not process deception the way we do, she said. It gathers data, processes it, and reaches conclusions based on certainty. We do not need to trick it forever. Only long enough. I hated how much sense that made. I swallowed, forcing my mind to settle. Walk me through it. Serena took a step closer. It has already touched your thoughts. It will try again. This time we allow it in, but we guide it. We feed it what it expects to find. I clench my jaw. You mean we let it kill you? Her voice remained calm. We make it think it has. I shook my head. I don't like this. You are not meant to, she said simply. A cold wind swept through the station ruins, rattling loose metal and sending dust curling along the cracked pavement. The air thickened, not physically, but perceptibly, like the weight of an unseen tide rolling in. It was coming. Serena inhaled sharply. You must believe it, she said. Every part of you. It cannot sense lies, but it can sense doubt. If you hold on to the truth, even in the smallest way, it will unravel everything. I swallowed hard. No pressure. She stepped back, her gaze steady. When it enters, do not fight. Let it take what it wants. A ripple passed through the air. The wind died, and then it was there. The space around us bent, warping like heat on asphalt. The hunter did not appear so much as it became. Emerging from nothing, its shape flickering in and out of focus, solid and incorporeal all at once. It had no face, no eyes, yet I felt its attention. The pressure returned, pressing against the edges of my mind. I forced my body to stay still, forced my thoughts to open. The weight pressed inward, searching, peeling. Serena collapsed. She didn't make a sound. One moment, she stood beside me. The next, she was on the ground, motionless. I clenched my fists, every instinct screaming at me to move, to help. But I didn't. I couldn't. The hunter's form pulsed, flickering between states. The pressure in my head sharpened. It wasn't speaking, not in words. But I understood the meaning anyway. Confirmed. Target eliminated. The weight lifted. The hunter stood still. I kept my breathing even, my expression blank. I let grief rise, not real, but convincing. The kind of hollow shock a man feels when something irreversible happens. The kind of loss that leaves people empty. I let the hunter see it. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the hunter stepped back. The distortion around it wavered. Its form flickered again, unstable, then began to dissolve. Pieces of it peeling away, unraveling into the void. It was leaving. I barely resisted the urge to exhale in relief. Serena remained still, unmoving, playing dead as if her existence depended on it. Because it did. The hunter pulsed once more. Then, with a final flicker, it was gone. The air returned. The wind stirred. The world realigned itself, settling into place as if nothing had happened. I stayed frozen for a moment longer, listening, waiting. Then I dropped to my knees beside Serena. She gasped, her body seizing as air rushed into her lungs. Her eyes snapped open, unfocused for a second before locking onto mine. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. You alive? A faint smirk tugged at the corner of her mouth. Barely. I sat back, running a hand down my face. I can't believe that worked. Serena pushed herself upright, wincing slightly. Neither can I. I huffed a dry laugh, shaking my head. Well, let's not test our luck. She nodded, glancing around as if expecting the hunter to reappear. But it wouldn't. It had seen what it needed. It had made its decision, and that decision was final. She exhaled, shoulders loosening. It's over. The words felt strange in the air. Over. The hunter was gone. The hunt was finished. For the first time since she had crashed into my life, I saw something different in Serena's expression. Not fear, not calculation, relief. She met my gaze. Thank you. I almost laughed. For what? Getting my mind invaded by some kind of reality-bending nightmare. Her smile was small, but real, for standing between me and it. When you didn't have to. I shrugged, glancing at the horizon. The first hints of dawn were beginning to break, soft streaks of amber cutting through the night. Guess I got bad instincts, I muttered. She didn't argue. We sat there for a while, neither of us speaking, letting the weight of everything settle. Finally, I pushed myself up, dusting off my jeans. So what now? Serena rose with me, stretching slightly. I keep running. I frowned. You don't have to. She studied me for a long moment. Then, quietly, I know, she didn't say more than that. She didn't have to. The world stretched before us, endless and uncertain. But for the first time, she wasn't facing it alone, and neither was I.